tonight. And so I want you to, first off, we're going to be in Ruth chapter number 1. Ruth chapter number 1. And I want you to begin in verse number 6. And I want you to read through verse number 18. I want you to read that silently. Ruth chapter number 1, begin in verse number 6. And stop at verse number 18. I'll give you a couple of moments to do that. And then I'm going to ask you some questions. And I've been thinking about the ways to ask these questions, so hopefully I'll ask them
silent would be good.
In a non-confusing way, so that... I'm just kidding, Brother Jimmy. Y'all go ahead and read.
Just one verse?
Through 18. 6 through 18.
6 through 18.
All right, anybody need any more time? All right, now, if you'll remember last Wednesday night, and one of the reasons I wanted to start out in Ruth is when we first started doing our Bible studies, we kind of started out in Daniel, and then we went to the book of Revelation, and I began to share with you those are two of the more complicated books, and I pretty much shared with you the types and the pictures and the imagery and all those different things down through there, but I wanted to go back to the book of Ruth because the book of Ruth is one of the more simpler books to understand. The pictures and the types and all of that are pretty plain to see. And this book will give you a better understanding of how to study other books because it says, like Moab. What's Moab a picture of? Sin. So we know that if somebody goes down, you always notice that they're always going down to Moab. If they leave Jerusalem, they're going into sin. So when they come up or they come out, they're going up. And they're going up to Jerusalem. It's not only something that's physically they're doing, but it's something spiritually they're doing. So as you begin to read these different things, I want you to keep in mind that the different names, the different places, the different activities of the people in Ruth will help you to see that there is more to the Bible than just the story that it's telling. Okay? Now, the last time we saw 3 graves in Moab. Now we're going to look at 3 widows in Moab. Now, these widows are there because what happened? What was the root cause of the reason that these ladies are now widows?
Their husbands died.
Yep. Why? The root cause. Not the physical cause, but the root cause. Sin. Okay? They've gone down into Moab. They've entered into sin. And once you enter into sin, there is going to be a result of that. Okay? So now we're looking at 3 widows in Moab. Now, each widow illustrates a different type of people. I want you to think and tell me what type of person or what type of people group does Naomi represent?
Good.
Moab.
Huh?
Moab.
Nope.
Sin.
What type of people group does Naomi represent? She represents a group of people spiritually.
Jewish. That's over.
Spiritually. That's ethnically. Now we're thinking about this from a spiritual. What type of spiritual lesson can we learn in reading those verses from Naomi? I kind of gave you some of the hints last week. Naomi is a picture of somebody that does what? Backslidden. So Naomi represents a group of people that know who God is. They've been in the house of God. They've been in the house of praise. And they leave God's place to go out into sin. So Naomi represents a group of people that are backslidden in their walk for God. Now, in reading those verses, thinking about Naomi and the personality that she is representing, or the mindset that she is representing, what kind of advice does she give spiritually?
Well, she told them to go back to their gods.
Yep.
So that was a very good advice.
All right, so let's think about the root cause. Why? Why does Naomi, who is in a state of being backslidden, tell someone who is lost to go back to your God? Why does she say that? Think. Why would she say that? Huh?
She's grieving.
She's what?
Grief? Over
Grief?
her husband or something?
Possibly. To some extent, yes. Why else?
She's lost her faith.
She's lost her faith. That's a big part of it. What else? Think about your mindset when you're backslidden.
She was these are better life.
Too many with that one. All right. What?
She wanted them to have a better life.
Okay. That is a key point right there. When you're backslidden and you're away from God because you've got out into sin, Miss Jane said she wants them to have a better life. Now you think about that. She, as the only saved person in the group, she's telling individuals that are lost and that have been in idolatry, that I want you to have a better life. Now she's not thinking spiritually, is she? She's thinking physically. So when somebody, now remember, Naomi is a picture of somebody backslidden. When a Christian gets out in sin, their mindset begins to change. That's what we learn from Naomi. When you're out in sin, you're no longer thinking about the spiritual side of things. You think about the physical. You start putting number one first. That's why she told them to go back to your family, go back to your gods, go back to where you came from, because she's lost that spiritual closeness to God, and she's thinking physically. She's thinking worldly. She's thinking in the flesh. So that's what happens. This is a picture here, an illustration of what happens when a Christian goes out in sin. Here's the advice. Here's a lesson. Do not take advice spiritually from someone who is not active in their walk with God. If you want spiritual advice, do not ask somebody that only comes to church part of the time. Do not ask somebody that's your best friend just because you've known them for a long time. You go to church and you ask that person, whether it's man or male or female, that shows up, that studies, that prays. They don't have to be perfect, but they are striving. They are trying to live like they're supposed to. Now, just because somebody messes up doesn't mean that they're not trying to do what's right. You look at Peter. Peter messed up, stuck his foot in his mouth over and over and over again. And who did Jesus choose to be the first pastor of the church? Peter. Yep. It's not that he was perfect, not that he was the best, not that he was more reserved than any of the others. But he was striving. He was doing his best. His heart was in the right place. Now, Naomi represents a group of people who start looking out for number one, whose heart is no longer in the right place. All right, now, let's talk about another side of Naomi. Naomi is the only, and I mentioned this before, the only Christian in the group. And I want you to look back at verse number 6. Then she arose with her daughters-in-law, that she might return from the country of Moab. For she had heard in the country of Moab how that the Lord had visited his people and giving them bread. Wherefore she went forth out of the place where she was, and her 2 daughters-in-law with her. Why did they follow Naomi? Now, did I emphasize enough the word she? That's the image, that's the message, is that Naomi hears, Naomi recognizes, Naomi gets up, and Naomi starts to leave. And then as a footnote, it says, and her 2 daughters-in-law with her. They are watching her. Now when you think about it, Naomi is the only godly light that they have. She's it. That also tells us Ruth and Orpah. Did I tell you what they're a picture of last week? Ruth and Orpah are both a picture of someone that is lost. In chapter number 1, up until this point, through the verses that we've read, Ruth and Orpah are pictures of individuals that are lost. They're in Moab. They originated in Moab. Now remember, Moab, picture of sin. They originated in Moab. Moab is all they've ever known. Moab is all they've ever practiced. Moab is all they've ever known. Pictures of people that are lost. And what are they doing? They are watching this individual that knows God. Now, what does that tell us? In your life, what does that say?
People are watching us.
People are watching you. Especially those that are lost. They're heard it described one way like this, that our life is a stage and you are going to be watched and critiqued. So when they see her getting up and leaving, they go right along with her. Now, We read on. Wherefore, in verse 7, she went forth out of the place where she was, and her 2 daughters-in-law with her, and they went on the way to return unto the land of Judah. Now, Naomi has left the land of God, and she has received from God the hand of discipline. And she's making preparation to go back home, but at this point in time, she's still in Moab. The daughter-in-laws are watching her, but what kind of advice? In verse number 8 does she give? Go, return each to her mother's house. The Lord deal kindly with you as you dealt with the dead and with me. What is supposed to be one of the occupations of a Christian?
Witness.
Witness. To point others to God. Now, remember, Naomi is a picture of who? Someone that has left God and gone out into sin. And what kind of advice is she giving? Don't come. Don't come. You don't need to go where I'm going. You need to go back to your own kind. Go back to your own people. Now, she sought to turn them away from God and encourages them to stay out in sin. Now, did I ask you the question a while ago? I'm having tongue trouble. Did I ask you earlier why she did that? We had a couple answers. No hope for today. When you think about Naomi and the condition that she's gotten herself in, she doesn't see any future. She doesn't feel any hope for where she is. No hope for today and no hope for tomorrow. She's just concerned with the physical part of it, because when you get out in sin, priorities change. Now you think for a minute. How many people do we know that's gone out into sin and priorities change? Quite a few. It's turning away from things spiritual and turning to things worldly. All right. Now, Orpah. Let's go to the next one. We've seen a discouraging widow here. So let's talk about the departing widow, Orpah. Now, who do you think Orpah represents spiritually?
Sinner intending to stay in sin.
That's a good way to put it. A sinner that has an opportunity. Now that's what she's got here. She's got an opportunity to go to God, and she turns her back and walks away. Now, Naomi could have been a positive influence, but she basically drives her back to Moab. Now you think about the weight of that for a moment. When we choose to get out in sin, this tells us that there's people that are watching us, and with our lifestyle and with our words, we can drive someone away from God. Now, when we stand before God at the judgment, when we stand before Jesus at the judgment seat, those types of things are going to come out when we're judged for the good and the bad. Now, Naomi doesn't help the situation, but who's ultimately responsible? Orpah. Yep. She is the one that makes the final decision. She chooses to stay in a cursed land. She chooses to stay in a place of darkness. She chooses her false gods. She chooses the way that she has always known. She doesn't choose change. She chooses, I guess, familiarity. Something is that right?
She takes the easy way.
Takes the easy way. Thank you. I need to use some of those easy way words. She takes the easy way. Now, she returns to her relatives, she returns to her religion, and she stays in Moab. Now, this is the last that we hear of her. Now, when this is the last that you hear of someone in the Bible, it's not known to us, but it's pretty predominantly assumed that they continued on in the shape that they were in. Now, when we see Orpah turn and walk away, and we never hear anything else about her, she's a picture. She's a picture of a group of people that are even around us today, that have an opportunity, that have heard the gospel and had an opportunity to accept Jesus and turned and walked away. And more than likely, we don't have anything to contradict it, died lost in that condition. All right, now the last one, we've got a determined widow. Pick up in verse number 14. And they lifted up their voice and wept again, and Orpah kissed her mother-in-law, but Ruth clave unto her. Now, in reading this story, who is Ruth a picture of? What group of people?
A lost person that chooses God.
A lost person that chooses God. Now, the only light that Ruth has seen as far as the gospel, who is that in? Who has that been?
Naomi.
Huh?
Is it Naomi? No.
Not the only one. Who else?
Elimelech.
Elimelech,
Mahlon and
Chilion. Now Ruth has seen all four. The only one left is Naomi. Has she seen a full picture of who God really is? No, she has not. She has only seen small glimpses of God's grace and God's mercy, God's compassion, God's love. She's seen some of God's judgment. She's seen some of God's chastisement. She's seen some of that. But she has only just got a small portion. For the ones that she is looking at, remember, they've left God and gone out into sin. But even in the life of someone that's left God and gone out into sin, we're seeing that there's enough light of God to even then convict a heart and bring them to a knowing relationship. Now, her decision does what? What does Ruth's decision to cleave unto her do for Ruth?
Gives her hope.
Gives her hope. What else? Spiritually, let's think about it.
It saves her to an extent.
It saves her. All right, so to what extent? There's Brother Scott question. To what extent? He did that to us Sunday. So to what extent?
Picking the words, Scott.
All right, Brother Scott, answer that one for us. To what extent does it save her?
As much as an Old Testament person could be.
Right. Right. It saves her to the extent that she chooses God, and that changes everything about her life. She was in darkness, now she's in light. She was in a place of sin, now she's going to a place of praise. She was in a place where there was despair, now she's going to a place of hope. She was going to a place with no prospects, and now she is going to the house of bread. You see this, everything changes with that one decision. And that's exactly what salvation does for us. It gives us a completely new outlook. It gives us a completely new life. I read a story. It was a college professor would go to the local diner and he would eat breakfast, sit around a big table with all the other local older men. And they were talking, and the college professor began to talk about the benefits of socialism. He said that if we had socialism for government, he said you'd get a new job, a new house, a new coat. He said, what could be better than that? And one old man down at the end of the table, he said, salvation in Jesus. For with salvation, salvation puts a new man in the job, it puts a new man in the house, and a new man in the coat. Because it changes everything about you. And verse number 16... Now, I want to just note out, and we've talked bad about Naomi quite a bit, but let's look at verse 15. And this is Naomi speaking, and she said, behold, thy sister-in-law is gone back to her people and to her gods. Return thou after thy sister-in-law. Let me just give you one more shot. Just get out of my way. Don't bother me anymore. Now that is a terrible attitude for a Christian. But that is what happens when you get out into the world. But notice Ruth. She's seen enough. She's understood enough. Ruth says in verse 16, entreat me not to leave thee, or to return from following after thee. For whither thou goest, I will go. Where thou lodgest, I will lodge. Thy people shall be my people, and thy God my God. Now, no doubt, she's probably worshipped false gods in Moab, because that's all she's ever known. But there was no light there. The only light she's seen, Mahlon, Chilion, Naomi, but now she's got a new light. Now she's got a new master. When she chooses God, salvation gives her a new hope, a new loyalty. So what she's saying is, for the rest of my life, I'm going to do this. Now, the difference between Ruth that we read about and the difference in the life of Naomi is we read here that Ruth made a commitment, a verbal, steadfast, dedicated commitment. Now, we don't read anything about Naomi doing that. We don't read anything about her making this verbal commitment. Now, we know where she's come from. We know what type of people she is. But we don't have that steadfastness, that rock-solid commitment. And Ruth, how does she convince us that she is making this commitment and it really means something to her? How does she convince us that for her it is real in her life? What actions does she show us?
She's not going anywhere. She's going to stay there.
Okay.
She does it verbally.
Do what?
She does it verbally.
She does it verbally.
And she follows through. She just takes no for, she doesn't take no for an answer. She is persistent in that she's going with Naomi and her people will be her people.
Yep. Persistence. Following through. Locking on and not letting go. Now that is evidence of a true change in the life of someone. It's not just words, but you can see the actions that come after. But there's something else. How much did Ruth have to give in order to get to this new land? What'd she have to pay?
She gave up all of her family, everything that she had known prior to, she gave it all up and went to a totally new land.
Yeah. So how did Naomi convince her to do that? No, she didn't, did she? So Ruth is doing what? She's stepping out by faith. Does that remind you of anything about salvation? She's walking by faith and not by sight. Because we're talking about a person that's lived in sin their whole life, probably never even been to Bethlehem, probably never even been to the kingdom of Israel. So in order for her to do this, she has to step out by faith.
How far was it from Moab to Bethlehem? How long do you think it took them to walk there?
I think it's only, if I remember right, only a couple of day journey, but you had to cross over Jordan. Yeah.
There was a lot of prejudice too between those two groups of people.
There's a lot of what?
Prejudice between those two groups.
Yeah.
They were not accepted by the Jews.
Right.
Unless they converted. So she would not have been accepted there had she not converted.
Right. And also, God had commanded them not to have anything to do with the Moabites. So they were even turned against by the Lord.
Even though she lived in that land of sin, there's no mention that she participated. In other words, there's not an indication that she did anything to worship, but she didn't participate, I'm sure, in all the activities of those people because they were sinful.
Yeah. And that's if you don't know it's sinful and you don't know there's anything wrong with it, do you see anything wrong with it?
Well, I see that she did. I think she was blindsided. I think she lived that life, so that was her life.
Yeah.
And then, like you said, through Naomi, and I defend Naomi by saying that she didn't choose to go there. I'm sure Emily, her husband was the leader. I blame him. I'm sure that, they got together as a family and said, we got to do something because it's a family in the land.
Mm-hmm.
When you haven't got anything to eat, you'll get desperate.
Yeah.
Not feeding them.
But with Ruth, even if she wasn't an active participant in worshiping the other gods, I would think that's kind of like somebody that's not a Christian, but they're a really good person. But that's not going to get them to heaven, is being a really good person.
That is exactly right.
So
Yeah.
she had to see that she needed salvation.
Right. And what Brother Jimmy was saying is, even if she didn't participate, you see it all around you all day long, and you know that that's what's in your life and all around you. But here's this group of people over here. They're just a little bit different. You see something in them that's a little bit different, and it creates a desire to find out what's going on in their life, why they're different.
She didn't see many though.
Huh?
She didn't see many that.
No, 4.
that she was basically crouched in her situation.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that's why Brian is so good at putting messages on marquee. But there's a lot of people that will read those that don't attend church and are not, they clueless to what that's talking about. I would. But if it reaches one person, then it reminds them of what. But Ruth, I thought, you know, we get back to the real cause of what Ruth did in this picture is this is God's plan right down through for Jesus to be born of Ruth. Boaz. And I'll say one thing we want to get to that what we're talking about Boaz. He knew what a good looking woman was.
What do you
And
think?
he didn't give up either.
What do you think that, last part of verse 17? You see that in different places in the Bible with all but death part thee and me. You know, the Lord do so to me and more also if all but death. It's almost like an oath or something that,
Yeah,
have you ever studied on that any?
I have not.
More about that?
I have not.
God do so to me, do what?
I don't know. I just took it at face value as an oath, and I never really looked much into that one. Anybody else? Helpful? Learn anything? Nobody nodding, so we'll do it different next time. Okay, all right. All right. If there's no one else, Brother Jimmy, would you dismiss us, please?
Lord, we're thankful again for all your blessings. We're thankful, Lord, when you healed us when we were sick. Lord, when you comforted us when we hurt, lifted us up when we were down. You just blessed us so much, and we're so thankful. I'm thankful enough, but I praise your name, Lord. I praise your holy name that you just put down on us and forgive us so many times we failed serving you. I pray for each family here. I pray for this community, this county, this state.